All right. My bad. Let's keep going. So.
And that's the Ashbringer questline. One of the earliest fables within the game was that in vanilla WoW, players could obtain the iconic Ashbringer, which was once held by the leader of the Silver Hand, Alexandros Mograine, and it makes sense. From the Four Horsemen fight in Extremis, players can obtain the corrupted Ashbringer, and there exists some extra lore in the Scarlet Monastery dungeon. If you take it to the Cathedral Wing, the mobs become friendly, and you get a unique cutscene with some RP between Alexandros and his son, and even some dialogue with High Inquisitor Fairbanks, alluding that the weapon could be cleansed if you brought it to Mograine's lost son in the Outland, which only mystified players back then because, well, the Outland obviously didn't exist. Regardless, it started a mad scramble of players trying to unlock the secrets to cleansing the corruption. Many fake screenshots started to crop up, and players got so desperate that it would infamously lead to fishing outside of Stratholme because it was jokingly referenced in a flavor item that you looted in the Altric Valley battleground. This itself would later be referenced by Blizzard actually for unlocking an alternate appearance for the Legion artifact version of the weapon. But combining all of this with the fact that the weapon does actually exist within the game files, it's not surprising that it became one of the game's most popular myths. But for one reason or another, probably because casters hadn't gotten a legendary yet, they instead went with the Atius chain, and Ashbringer was kinda thrown to the wayside. As time would show, players would finally be able to obtain it during the Legion expansion through the artifact system, but this definitely has potential to see attention within the Season of Discovery. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is certainly opinionated. I think that there's definitely weight to the argument that by giving players such an iconic weapon, it's no longer iconic, and we saw that with Legion, with an Ashbringer around every corner, but maybe making the chain extremely expensive and time-consuming and difficult to finish could potentially be a way to circumvent that. Maybe they can make it a time-limited system like the Scarab Lord, so only a very few lucky players per server would be the recipients. Next, we have a zone that you probably know about.
I actually glitched it out. I remember there was like a YouTube video that showed you how to not to glitch it out, but like there was a path to go to Igel. There was even like a small like it's on like still on working like but from like the devs, and it was completely empty. Like it was such a zone. So it has such mystery to it, because like basically like it was surrounded and you couldn't access it, but like kind of could see it from far away, you know.
It's Mount Hyjal. Nestled in northern Kalimdor, there's quite a large zone, but when you mouse over it, you'll find that it doesn't have a name, and the closest that players were able to get to it was on a flight path, but with some tricky wall jumping and some persistence, you'd find a zone that seems fully crafted geographically, but just lacking mobs and NPCs. The one exception being the infamous Guardians of Blizzard, which were these infernals that they haphazardly threw about the area that would insta-kill any trespassers to sort of guard the area. It was a very poor band-aid fix, because players could quite easily sneak past them and explore this never-before-seen zone. Some highlights would be the crater where Archimonde landed in Warcraft 3. Intriguingly, you also have a clone of the Onyxia raid entrance, clearly showing that there were some plans for another raid in vanilla. And finally, of course, the bones of Archimonde hanging off the World Tree, laying in the same spot where he was vanquished in the RTS. This zone would be unfinished for all of vanilla, and would first be repurposed in the Battle of Hyjal raid in the Burning Crusade, and later, of course, in Cataclysm, where it was properly finished with quests, mobs, and NPCs, and players are now enjoying that in Cataclysm Classic, actually. As far as potential content for Classic Plus is concerned, though, this one definitely has a lot of it, and it's usually one of the first zones that people think of for new content in vanilla. After Hyjal, I of course have to follow up with Karazhan. Most know this as the introductory level 70 raid for the Burning Crusade, and then also the remake in Legion, but Karazhan was supposed to be in the vanilla version of the game, and it was ultimately scrapped due to time constraints, and as John Statz described in his book, The World of Warcraft Diary, there were also challenges with level design. The portal lies dormant in vanilla World of Warcraft, as there's no dungeon ID associated with it, and the closest that players ever got was through the creation of Atiesh in Nexramas, after collecting its shards from the various bosses and defeating Kel'Thuzad. Aside from its high-end stats, upon use, it created a portal straight to Karazhan for its wielder and their raid to use, so clearly there were plans for it to be implemented in some way in vanilla. Although the instance itself didn't exist, that didn't stop players from
Yeah, it's amazing that like ATS, just like other legendaries during vanilla, no one fucking got him. All right, especially ATS because Nexramas, like no one fucking finished it. But like, can you believe it? Like, it teleports you to fucking Karazhan and there's nothing. But next expansion, there's something. But wait until the next expansion. Back then, like, people didn't even expect like an expansion for a while. Like, didn't like existed this expansions didn't have the status that like it has now, where it's like, of course there will be an expansion to Guild Wars, Final Fantasy, World of Warcraft. What you think about? Like, it's not the case anymore. Like back then, it was like, I remember it's like, there's an expansion for WoW. What the fuck, we get more of this? And we did, and we were really fucking surprised and happy.
Along its outskirts. Off to the side is what is known as the Karazhan Crypts, which is completely devoid of mobs and NPCs, but nonetheless is quite extensive, containing many catacombs and corridors, and an underwater room called the Pool of Upside Down Sinners. Obviously, there were big plans here. Some speculate a dungeon, others even another raid, some just a questing area. Blizzard did eventually make partial use out of this area in the Legion expansion, but whether it be the crypts or even the raid itself, it's certainly one of the big unfinished areas just asking to be finished for Season of Discovery. Azshara is a zone infamous for neglect. Aside from a handful of quests, a molten core reputation that sends you into the middle of nowhere once a week for a douse, and also a world boss, there's really not a lot going on here. In fact, back in the day, because of this,
the world bosses like were completely forgotten, and they were dropping epics, but like completely forgotten by players. Like guilds, like, you know, like missed it.
And its resulting low traffic. It was one of the more popular bot farms because,
well, like back then, you have to think about the fact that like, you need to fucking move the 44 players to the fucking like no man's land, right?
They would have less of a chance of being found and reported by the players. However, adventurous players with a keen eye would uncover the remnants of the Azshara Crater Battleground, similar to the Warsong entrance on the border between Ashenville and the Barrens. You'll find abandoned Horde and Alliance encampments, which would serve as the hub that held the faction NPCs and vendors, and also the portal to zone into the actual battleground. Not much is known of this battleground other than an abandoned map file, and that it was going to be MOBA in style. At this point, there was a mod for Warcraft 3 named Dota that was becoming extremely popular. As it turns out, popular enough that they would make a standalone version of the game called Dota 2, and eventually escape the grasp of Blizzard through a lengthy legal battle. And though Blizzard tried their hand at this game mode officially in 2015 with the release of Heroes of the Storm, their earliest attempt, if you would call it that, was the Azshara Crater, which would be a third-person MMO take on the genre, possibly similar to Smite, for those who have played that game. That's not the only missing piece from the zone, though. Back during the pre-release, the more adventurous players
Could be interesting still to this day, a MOBA battleground in WoW.
would, of all things, find the remnants of the Dark Portal buried in the waters off of the coast, which may seem strange at first, but back during the alpha of the game, they just used this Dark Portal as a placeholder for dungeon entrances. Funny enough though, back then, because this wasn't as widely known, this would turn Azshara into one of the many hotspots for exploration by players who thought that the Outland secretly existed. Maybe one of those people trying to figure out how to cleanse their Ashbringer.
People really had a different like mentality when it comes to like what's going on in the games. It created so much mysteries. They were believing anything and everything for within this game. People were passionate in a way that was obsessive and really different to this than today. But it was also because like there wasn't like this fucking like people were not like completely drowned into like content. They just had WoW and they played WoW and they were happy with WoW and they were like doing everything WoW, you know. And so that's why also like this mentality completely disappeared now, whereas back in the day it was like completely normal to have like this many mysteries within like Guild Wars, same, Final Fantasy, same, you know, but like especially WoW, because WoW was really like this in between was the modern MMORPG that actually like modeled a new way of gaming.
But regardless of all of that, at some point,
And we survive because like think about it, like the WoW that the people play, the retail, it comes from the same fucking classic WoW. Like Guild Wars 2, Final Fantasy fucking remake. Like there is no like juggernaut that actually didn't like made it so from the first like game engine and first like complete game.
there were plans for a dungeon in the waters of Ashara, but for unknown reasons, again, probably time constraints, it was abandoned. So certainly something they have an opportunity to revive in the Season of Discovery and actually give more purpose to a pretty barren zone. Speaking of instances, our next destination lies in Stormwind. In the western part of the city, players can find the Stormwind Stockade, which is a prison overrun by rebellious Defias gang members. Although it's quite simple, it's one of the more iconic and memorable dungeons from vanilla. Most people have run it at some point, but did you know that to the east, there's another stockade? It's blocked off by a gate, but if you're able to slip past it, you'll find a portal, and this one actually works. This is the Stockade Raid, as it's known. Think the dungeon, but just much bigger and much easier to get lost in since everything looks the same, pretty much. This version holds 2 floors of the rooms and hallways that you can find in the Stockade dungeon. It is completely empty of mobs, of course, but interesting to see that it was finished enough to actually exist. Now, some would say that this doesn't really have a lot of potential for Classic Plus because it's unfair to the Horde, and my response to that is, first off, fuck the Horde. But 2, I would actually make the argument that this is exactly what the spirit of vanilla is. Vanilla is quite known for not being hyper obsessed with balance and fairness. I mean, just look at the 2 exclusive classes. Maybe a good middle ground would be that if it is a raid or a dungeon, give the Horde an equivalent somewhere in Orgrimmar, but still keep them completely unique. Unique bosses, unique layout, quests, loot. I think that would be way more spirit of vanilla than anything else that they could do. And it also encourages replayability since both factions offer more unique experiences. But we're not leaving Stormwind yet. I of course have to mention this gate right here between the Trade District and Old Town. Kind of in a dead-end area, you'll find an instance portal that's gated off, which just left players wondering what plans they had for it. But as it turns out, what you're looking at is one of the earlier attempts at player housing. Not the first, as evidenced by the screenshot from the alpha, which perfectly encapsulates exactly why housing wouldn't work in World of Warcraft. Every area has a purpose, whether it be a questing hub, a spawn location for enemies, giving
And player housing during World of Warcraft midnight, actually, after all these years. So he made this video 1 year ago, and vanilla was more than 10 years ago. Can you believe it? They were already thinking about housing, and after all these years, they finally did it. It took fucking midnight to fucking like get player housing.
players the ability to drop houses would be disruptive, assuming that they behave, which they of course won't, because the first thing they'll do is plop it down on top of critical hubs. For player housing to work, the world has to be built for it. A good example here would be Star Wars Galaxies, where the planets were absolutely massive, but also mostly empty to support player buildings, and not just houses, and not even neighborhoods, but entire cities with shuttle ports and respawn points and strip clubs. But because the world wasn't built for it in WoW, the only way for it to work really is for it to be instanced, and the developers realized this as early as vanilla, as you could see, as this portal would zone you into a housing district in Stormwind, where presumably you could purchase or rent your own residence, possibly decorate it, possibly invite party or guild members over, maybe a good RP spot for guild meetings or something. But as was shown in the Warlords of Draenor, this system also has its issues, such as the world becoming empty and feeling more like a single-player game, which is very anti-vanilla in my opinion. So as far as Classic Plus is concerned, I think that it would be a bad call, and I think because of that it probably won't be a thing, but I wanted to mention it anyway since I feel like it's too big to leave out, a remnant of one of the very first attempts at player housing in the game. No one can really agree on what Classic Plus is, but what I commonly see is a level cap increase, and with a level cap increase probably means new quests, new zones, and preferably, in my opinion,
I actually don't believe in Vanilla Plus. Like, I think that, like, it will disrupt, like, retail too much. It will create, like, two games. Like, the thing is that, like, right now, especially, like, we get, like, Season of Discovery and everything. Like, basically, like, Season of Discovery, and it became kind of like, you get your thrill from, like, retail, and then you get, like, Season of Discovery, because most players, like, are actually, like, fucking new players, right? So Vanilla Plus, like, unless you go into into private servers, will never exist. It's too disruptive. It creates like too many problems, and yeah.
Within the Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor, since I think they're a pretty big part of Vanilla's identity. So in this case, real estate will be pretty important. So areas like Hyjal would be prime for this, but there are more. One of the big ones, second to Hyjal, can be found on the northern end of the Eastern Plaguelands. These two zones would eventually become Quolthalas, the Eversong Woods and Ghostlands in the Burning Crusade expansion. At the border here, you'll find some fallen trees blocking the path, with a high elf named Add-on, of course referring that this area is indeed planned for an add-on or expansion, the Burning Crusade. So unlike Hyjal, this area doesn't actually exist physically in the game. Well, at least it's not crafted and fleshed out to the extent of Hyjal.
Yeah, you need to take a portal to get there.
If you get past the fallen trees, you will find a small little elven hut. Apparently, Quolthalas wasn't as huge of an empire as we thought, but aside from that, it's just all unfinished flat plains. But looking at the map here, this is a ton of land for 2 or 3 entire zones that they could create in their own unique way. But next, we have the Emerald Dream. This is another really old myth from the game, and one that's been flirted with here and there in Legion and Dragonflight. But the earliest version exists in Vanilla World of Warcraft, though it never saw the light of day. It's referenced in-game in a few areas, a protagonist from the RTS.
Basically, there is a portal to the Emerald Dream, but like we never with a boss dragon, like a raid boss, that fucking like waits in front of it, but you never get to go for it.
Malfurion Stormrage is residing in it through all of Vanilla, and the players are able to have a dialogue with him via the Scepter of the Shifting Sands questline from Ahn'Qiraj. As far as its purpose is concerned, it could really be anything. It could be another zone, it could be a raid, or a dungeon. It really depends on what they envision Classic Plus to be, again, if it's even going to exist at all. Questlines hold the potential for unfinished content, certainly, and there are quite a few to be found in Vanilla. One of the more mysterious ones, and loosely related to the Emerald Dream, is the Aranicus questline, where after killing the final boss of the Sunken Temple, players can loot the Essence of Aranicus trinket, which upon use produces a green AoE fart cloud, and also a rage whisper like how you get in PvP. This opens up a quest to an NPC named Atharius in the Swamp of Sorrows, who then sends you to another guy in Winterspring, where it just abruptly ends, and taking your essence in the process, so you don't want to do this, especially considering how rare good trinkets are in Vanilla. A community manager back in 2005 teased that the questline was being worked on, and it had promise, but unfortunately, for unknown reasons, it never saw the light of day. Across over the sea, on Kalimdor, we have a similar situation with Uldum. First, though, paying a visit to the Uldaman dungeon, At the end, players can complete the Platinum Discs quest, which gives a lot of lore of the Titans that approximately 1% of the player base actually read because it's really, really long. But even more unknown, and there's nothing to tell you this, but this opens up another quest scouting out a giant locked gate with elite giants patrolling nearby. This is Uldum, another area that was planned for vanilla WoW. Talking to the Stone Watcher through the quest, he'll tell you that he won't grant you access without an item called the Plates of Uldum, which could possibly have been a key for attunement, much like the Drakefire Amulet for Onyxia. And
yeah, and it became like the Sands of Time, like the Dragons of Time zone, if I remember correctly.
reporting back to Ironforge, the Explorers League will tell you to come back soon, and that Uldum beckons. Well, as it turned out, soon meant 2010, during the Cataclysm, where it was finally finished and turned into a full...
Oh, no. Okay, yeah, no, it doesn't talk about like the zone in Tenaris. Like there's...
fledged zone with quests and dungeons and a raid. Next to Hyjal, and what would eventually become Eversong and Ghostlands, this is definitely a contender for endgame content updates. And in the same zone, not too far away,
yeah, Caverns of Time, yeah.
we of course have the Caverns of Time, where the possibilities really are limitless.
You could enter through the door and actually see what's going on. It was empty as well back then, but like people were so passionate that I actually like under Ironforge, you can actually go there if you do a duel against a mage and he ships you. And actually you go through an invisible door and you go under Ironforge. It's a zone that like was never used after that. Like, but it's interesting how like you can go in certain places and yeah, like it just exists. And back in vanilla, well, I fucking went there and I was like, what the fuck? Damn. Like I went to the secret place for like that's just kind of forgotten, you know?
Yes, obviously the instance portals are inactive in vanilla here, but this is when you really start to realize just how much content was originally intended for vanilla. This area, as players would find out in the Burning Crusade,
like people didn't had enough, you know, like when especially when we're playing, like now people are like min-maxing and like all these words exist, right? But back then it's like the Burning Crusade came out, I was like, I just finished like leveling to 60. I remember like being happy with like doing my small raids and stuff. I was at fucking Molten Core level and they were at fucking Nextramus, and for like the average player that fucking like discovered the game, it's like, friend, like you cannot believe how much we had, because it's like the pacing was completely different, you know, like, and because of that, like most player, like they were at Molten Core, Blackrock, Blackrock, like BWL, Blackwall, like no one fucking went to fucking Nextramus. People didn't even knew what the fuck was Nextramus. Blackwing Lair, right? And like I can tell you that like seeing this, they had even more planned, and like since the pacing of the game was completely different, like I can tell you that like people had so plenty back in the day. Like when the Burning Crusade got released, like I went twice to Blackwing Lair, to give you an example. Like it took me months to fucking like get the fucking like I killed the Nixia, finished Molten Core a couple times, finished Zul'Gurub, and that's it, right? And it was enough. And I'm seeing all this, and it's like it was like different type of like different type of work. Like I gotta say, because like then like at the Burning Crusade, actually like I got the time to fucking like do more, but like it was paced differently and it was more accessible, but at the same time, god damn, back then it was like something like, ooh, something that took so long to fucking like get there, you know, like, and it was so enough. And then you see all these plans like they add on top to add, and people are like, oh, it's a shame, it's a shame. If you play back then, you had so much to do. It was the pacing was so slow but like so well done, and because of that it's like, yeah, like quite enough, you know, quite fucking enough, quite fucking enough. But like it's amazing that like they were like, sad thing, we didn't got the time to fucking like add the Mount Agel with fucking like fucking like caverns of time and Uldum, and you're like what the fuck will have we done? Will players have done with fucking like even more content? They barely got the time to fucking like grind Molten Core, finish Zul'Gurub, and level up to the cap. That's pretty much where people were at for PvP, and some people got happy with what they got with PvP. That's pretty much where people were at, and it's like, add to this like 3 more high level zones, but like maybe they could have like keep on going with vanilla for like longer, but like at the same time it's like there was so much to do, so much content. And we talk about like for one player, one character. Imagine like you want to reroll like and stuff like that. You are like enough, you know.
Is a hub for crucial moments within the game's world that don't line up with the current timeline, whether that be the opening of the Dark Portal prior to the events of the game, or the culling of Stratholme, or the battle for Hyjal. It holds many memorable dungeons and raids. When time travel is involved, the options are limitless, really, so anything can go here. Maybe there'll even be a portal to stop BFA and Shadowlands from happening, or from the developers ruining the 2019 line of Classic by releasing gameplay destroying level boosts, and later the WoW token. Told you so, by the way. Anyways, next we have Grimbatal. Back on over to the Eastern Kingdoms. In the Wetlands will be a gauntlet of elite dragonkin, and at the end, a giant locked gate.
Let's be honest, like the fucking like level boost, okay, it got released. Like I agree that like it destroys the game, but like gaming has changed since then, right? Who the fuck is complaining about this now that it's got released, right? Fucking no one. Like I know I'm also against like these level boosts, and I'm also against like this type of like anti-gaming type of like mentality, but at the same time it's like it got released, they choose that it's not that bad. All right, it's not that bad, and yeah, it's not that bad, and it's not a catastrophe.
The War of the Three Hammers, which were between the Bronzebeards, the Dark Irons, and the Wild Hammer, had concluded, with the Bronzebeards as the victor. And while the Dark Irons got drunk and made their home in the Blackrock Mountain, the Wild Hammer ventured north past the gates of Dun Gaz and founded their own kingdom in the mountain of Grimbatal, which they were later forced out of after it had been cursed during an attack by the Dark Iron. One of Thorison's sorcerers, Modgood, had cursed the cities for shadows to attack all who entered, and though she met her demise, her curse remained. Eventually, the fortress was seized by the Dragonmaw clan and used as a prison for Alexstrasza before she got breast reduction surgery. As players would find out, this would be another area that would finally be finished during the Cataclysm expansion, where the Twilight's Hammer eventually took up residence. But as far as vanilla was concerned, this was another really big piece of unfinished business that the players could only speculate on what was held inside. And last, but certainly not.
Can you believe that? Like, they saw the zone and they speculated about it, and 6 years later, they didn't, like, a couple of years later, the developers didn't forget the zone, and they fucking did something about it, and there were answers to the speculations. Like, this is what I like about Blizzard, you know?
At least we have Gilneas, another Cataclysm entry here, but on the southern end of the Silverpine Forest, we have Gilneas, the home of the furries. The forces of Erigel have a strong presence within the forest, Their humans turned werewolf by way of a curse, and not just within the lore, but actual gameplay elements with the inhabitants of Shadowprey Village roaming the town in their human form by day and transforming into elite worgen at night. One of the few areas in the game that actually changes depending on the time of day, in fact. If you manage to sneak past the gate, you'll find an empty chasm awaiting you. It's not quite as extravagant as the Cataclysm version, I'd say, but another one of the big mystery areas in vanilla that could definitely have some potential here. But that's about it, for the most major stuff at least. A lot of this stuff has obviously been finished, primarily in BC or Cataclysm, so if they were to return to it in Season of Discovery, I think they would have to be careful to change them up quite a bit, especially with Cataclysm Classic.
It's really hopeful. I'm really against like Season of Discovery going into its own timeline. Like leave the Season of Discovery just like balance changes, making like the game fun and stuff like that. Because like I don't see anything else, you know.
Release, I think that it would be wise to maintain separation. No one can agree on what Classic Plus is, but from what I've seen, a lot of it is that it should be an alternate timeline that splits away from BC and goes down its own route. So seeing this finished with, quote, the spirit of vanilla touch that people talk
absolutely not. Please don't do that.
About could definitely have a lot of potential. Really, how closer can you get than to...
But I agree to disagree that like some players like actually like that didn't follow retail like are completely like outside of like my love for like WoW and what it became.
Finished content that was originally made by the original developers back in 1999 to 04. So considering that, if they do go down the Classic Plus route, it wouldn't at all surprise me that at least a few of the things in this video would see some attention in later phases. Even if not though, I hope that this video was at least interesting and give you a peek at just how much bigger this game could have been. But aside from that, like the video if you liked it, because I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Alright. Subscribe to Matt Season Show if you didn't. Like, this dude is quite a fucking legend. So yeah, I actually didn't knew most of that. So yeah, good video. Thank you so much, Matt Season.